They found him chained to the tracks in the heart of a storm, bleeding, broken, and left to die. No one heard his cries, except a 5-year-old boy who claimed God told him someone was in danger. What happened next wasn't just a rescue, it was a divine appointment. Because sometimes miracles don't come with angels, they come with pause, pain, and a bond that even death couldn't break. If you believe God still speaks in whispers and storms, keep watching. If this story touches your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you believe in second chances and compassion in the silent miracles God gives us every day, subscribe to this channel for more heartfelt stories and comment amen to pray for more homes filled with light, love, and purpose. May God bless you for all the goodness you carry within you. Bozeman, Montana had never felt so still before a storm. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of pine and ozone, as if the forest itself held its breath. Late October brought early darkness, and now at nearly 6 in the evening, the sun had already dipped behind the mountains. The clouds above had turned black and swollen, curling low over the rooftops like fists pressed to glass. A harsh northern wind rattled the fence outside the Walker family's modest home on the edge of town. Their backyard sloped gently toward an overgrown thicket, beyond which lay the long-forgotten railway tracks, and used for years, or so everyone thought. Inside, the lights flickered. The old house groaned slightly in the wind, like it remembered something dreadful. Emily Walker, 34, stood barefoot in the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her auburn hair pulled into a messy bun. She had the lean frame of a former marathoner, but motherhood and stress had softened her in places. Her hazel eyes were kind but carried shadows under them, shadows left behind by the long months her husband had spent deployed overseas. Though he'd been home for nearly 2 years now, the quiet never fully returned to her. Jake Walker, 37, sat on the couch, one arm slung across the backrest, the other holding a half-full mug of black coffee. He was a stocky man with a military bearing, broad-shouldered and straight-backed, but with a gentleness in his green eyes that only his son ever really saw. His face was still youthful, but bore a faint scar along the jawline, a souvenir from a roadside explosion in Kandahar that had ended his service early. Since then, he'd worked as a contractor and part-time mechanic, content with the slow rhythm of civilian life, though he sometimes missed the clarity of command. Their son, Caleb, had just turned 5. He was small for his age, with thick blonde curls that refused to be tamed and bright blue eyes that were always scanning, absorbing, wondering. Unlike other boys in his class, Caleb was quiet. Not shy exactly, just different. He spoke when he needed to, but mostly he observed, often staring out windows like he was waiting for something to appear. Now Caleb stood pressed against the living room window, his tiny hands smudging the glass as he stared out into the growing gloom. His toy trucks lay abandoned on the floor behind him. The storm was coming fast, lightning flickered low on the horizon, and the first fat raindrops began tapping against the window pane like ghostly fingertips. "Storm's rolling in hard," Jake muttered, glancing at the radar on his phone. "Winds out of the north. Could hit 60 miles an hour." Emily poured a second mug and passed it to him. "Should I bring in the garden chairs?" Jake shook his head. "Too late. Latching tumble." At the window, Caleb suddenly stiffened. His body went rigid, as if something had grabbed him from the inside. "Did you hear that?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Jake glanced up from his coffee. "Hear what, bud?" Caleb turned, his expression pale and uncertain. "Someone's crying." Emily raised an eyebrow and approached the window. "It's probably just the wind, sweetie. Storm winds make funny sounds." But Caleb shook his head with urgency, curls bouncing. "No, not the wind. It's someone. They're hurt." Jake and Emily exchanged a glance, the kind parents share when trying to decode the mystery world of a child's mind. Still, something in Caleb's tone stopped Jake from brushing it off. Emily knelt beside him. "Where do you hear it, honey?" Caleb pointed toward the dark beyond the backyard. "Over there, near the tracks." Jake sighed and stood, setting his coffee down. "Tracks haven't been used in years, buddy. Probably just an animal." Caleb's eyes filled with tears. It's not an animal. He's sad. He's really, really scared. The way he said it made the hairs on Jake's arms stand up. Emily placed a hand on her husband's arm. Just go take a look, Jake. For his peace of mind. With a quiet curse to the weather, Jake grabbed his rain jacket and flashlight from the hook. He opened the front door, and a gust of cold wind slammed it back against the frame. Caleb dashed to his side, already trying to pull on his yellow rain boots. Jake crouched. You're not coming out in this. But Caleb looked up with pleading eyes. I have to. He's calling for me. Something about the certainty in the boy's voice hit Jake like a blow to the chest. He hesitated, then helped Caleb zip up his coat and fasten his boots. Emily handed them both umbrellas and watched them step into the storm with a tightness in her chest she couldn't explain. The rain was falling harder now, slicing sideways in sheets that stung against their skin. The flashlight beam wavered as Jake led the way through the backyard, pushing open the gate. Mud clung to their boots. Caleb walked fast despite the wind, pulling his father toward the trees. There, he shouted suddenly, pointing. The flashlight swept across the old railway embankment and froze. Chained to the track was a dog, a large German shepherd. Soaked, trembling, its fur matted with blood and rain. A thick metal chain was wrapped tightly around its neck and paws, pinning it to the rail. The dog whimpered, low, broken, human almost in its pain. Jake cursed under his breath and started forward, Caleb right on his heels. The storm howled louder now. And far in the distance, so faint at first it could have been a memory, came the sound of a train horn. Jake dropped the flashlight, its beam flickering wildly as he scrambled down the slick embankment. The chain was rusted and tight, biting into the German shepherd's soaked fur. The dog thrashed in panic, eyes wild and full of pain. Caleb stood rooted above them, his small fists clenched at his sides, tears mingling with the rain on his cheeks. You're hurting him, Caleb whispered, voice trembling. He's scared. It's too tight. Jake winced. He wasn't trying to hurt the dog. The chain had been wound with brutal intent, looping through itself in a crude makeshift lock. It's okay, buddy, Jake muttered, both to the dog and to his son. I've got you. But he didn't. The chain wouldn't budge. He looked up, rain pelting his face, and saw it, headlights. Far away but growing closer. A low rumble followed. The train. Caleb's eyes widened in horror. Dad, I see it, Jake said through gritted teeth. Get back, Caleb. Now. Caleb didn't move. Instead, he knelt down beside the dog, pressing one small hand against the animal's head. Miraculously, the German shepherd stilled. Its ragged breathing slowed. It locked eyes with the child, and in that moment, there was something unspoken, a recognition perhaps. Jake was about to shout again when a voice cut through the rain like a blade. Step aside. I've got it. A man emerged from the tree line. Soaked, tall, with a frame like a worn leather jacket, tough, weathered, but once elegant. He carried a pair of bolt cutters and moved with the speed of someone who didn't need to ask questions. His name, they would later learn, was Logan Brooks. He was around 40, with storm gray eyes and a short beard peppered with early silver. His clothes were plain, a navy waterproof jacket, jeans caked in mud, but there was a steadiness to his presence, as if he'd seen too many emergencies to panic. Who are you? Jake barked, instinctively moving in front of Caleb. Logan didn't answer immediately. He dropped to one knee beside the dog and examined the chain with a quick, professional glance. I've been tracking this dog for 3 days, he said. He wasn't supposed to end up like this. With a grunt, he positioned the bolt cutters and snapped the first loop. The metal shrieked. Another cut. The chain gave way. Jake scooped Caleb into his arms and pulled back. Logan yanked the last coil free, dragging the dog clear of the track just as the horn split the sky. The train roared past seconds later, a blur of deafening metal and wind. The ground trembled beneath their feet. The German shepherd didn't move. It lay on its side, eyes open but dazed, chest rising in shallow gulps. Logan pressed 2 fingers to its side. Still breathing, he muttered. Jake looked from the man to the freed dog. You said you were tracking him. Why? Logan stood, slicking wet hair back from his face. Long story. But the short version? That dog was property. Property? Yeah. Of a man named Maddox. Runs a private K9 security firm out of northern Wyoming. Hires out attack-trained dogs to the highest bidder. Ranger. Ranger? Caleb interrupted. That's his name. Logan blinked, surprised. How'd you know that? He told me, Caleb said softly. Logan looked at the boy. You heard him bark or something? Caleb shook his head. Not like that. I just knew. He's hurting all over. His paws. His neck. His heart, too. Logan met Jake's eyes, and something passed between them. An understanding that whatever was happening here, it wasn't simple. That dog refused a command, Logan continued. Refused to attack a civilian during a training op. That made Maddox furious. The punishment for defiance was supposed to be death. But instead of putting him down, they did this. Left him to be hit by a train, Jake finished. Yeah. Why didn't you go to the police? Because Maddox owns a few of them. And I didn't know where they'd taken Ranger until I picked up his trail yesterday. I was hours behind. Emily arrived moments later, breathless and soaked, flashlight in hand. Are you okay? Jake nodded. We're fine. We've got company. She looked at Logan wary, then at the dog. Her breath caught. Oh my God. He needs help, Logan said. Now. Together, they carried Ranger back to the house, Caleb refusing to leave the dog's side. They laid him gently on a blanket near the fireplace. Emily fetched towels and water. Jake called the nearest vet, but the line was down from the storm. Logan stayed kneeling, checking vitals. He's dehydrated. Might have internal damage. But he's strong. Caleb sat nearby, watching silently. He hadn't said a word since they came inside. His eyes were fixed on Ranger's. The dog blinked slowly. Logan looked at Caleb. What you said earlier, about him talking to you, that wasn't a joke, was it? No, Caleb said simply. I hear his feelings. It's like colors in my chest. I know when he's scared. Or brave. Logan didn't press. Instead, he nodded once. You've got a gift, kid. He's not scared anymore, Caleb added. He feels safe now. Jake watched the exchange with concern. You sure he's not concussed? Your boy. Logan shook his head. I've seen dogs trust people before. But not like this. This isn't training. This is connection. In the quiet, thunder rumbled once more. Outside, the storm gathered strength. But inside the little house, the air felt charged with something different, like fate had cracked a door open. Later that night, as Emily dozed on the couch and Jake sat at the kitchen table questioning every part of the last few hours, Logan stepped outside to make a call. A short, tense message to a number he hadn't dialed in months. Ranger's alive, he said, and someone's going to pay for what was done to him. The storm dragged into morning like a wounded beast, its breath still rattling the window panes as dawn bled into the sky. Pale gray light seeped through the curtains, revealing a world soaked in quiet, as if the earth itself were pausing to listen. Inside the Walker house, the scent of damp wool, old coffee, and singed fireplace logs lingered. The hearth still glowed faintly with last night's fire, casting long, slanted shadows across the hardwood floor where Ranger lay curled atop a thick, folded quilt. Caleb sat beside him, legs crossed in his dinosaur pajamas, one small hand resting on the dog's flank. His eyes were half-lidded, but he hadn't slept. He didn't want to. Ranger's breathing was deeper now, rhythmic, though still raspy. The crusted blood on his neck had been gently cleaned by Emily during the night, who knelt with the care of a nurse but the heart of a mother. The gash across the dog's shoulder had been packed with antiseptic and wrapped in gauze. He looked better, but only just. In the kitchen, Jake sat across from Logan Brooks, both men nursing mugs of reheated coffee. Jake had changed into dry flannel and jeans, though his hair was still damp. Logan wore a borrowed hoodie that hung loosely on his lean frame. His damp coat and boots were laid near the door, and the warmth of the kitchen made him seem less mysterious, though no less haunted. So you knew the dog, Jake said flatly, not a question. Logan nodded once. Knew him before they turned him into a number. Ranger. Yeah. He wasn't always called that. Back when he was still mine, I named him Boone. Jake frowned. Yours? Logan traced his thumb along the rim of his mug, eyes distant. I served with a K-9 unit overseas. Afghanistan. Did 3 tours. After I came back, I couldn't hack civilian life. Too quiet, too slow. So I took a job with a private security outfit, Eagle Crest Tactical. That's where I met Maddox. He was building something dirty from the start, training dogs to intimidate, not protect. You were part of that? For too long, yeah. I trained pups the right way. He twisted them later. But Boone, Ranger, he was different. Smart. Sensitive. I trained him for 8 weeks. He learned commands like language, not instinct. But he had this compass. He wouldn't attack if he thought it was wrong. That made him dangerous to Maddox. Jake studied him. So what happened? Logan looked down, his voice lower now. 3 months ago, we were running drills. Maddox had a girl brought in, some staged threat scenario. Boone was ordered to take her down. She didn't do anything. She was crying, maybe 17. Boone froze, growled, stepped between her and the handler. Maddox lost it. Said the dog was defective. Ordered him destroyed. I tried to intervene, and they cut me out, kicked me off site. Jake leaned back slowly, and they chained him to a rail. Logan's jaw flexed. To send a message. Not just to the dog. Emily entered the kitchen with quiet steps. She was tall and slender, with tired eyes that now carried more questions than fear. She handed Logan a fresh towel for his hair. You're saying that if we hadn't found him, she began. Logan nodded. He'd be dead. And Maddox would still be laundering contracts through his training business. Emily exchanged a look with Jake. So what now? Logan exhaled, rubbing his temples. I'll leave today. Don't want to bring trouble to your doorstep. But I need to figure out where they're keeping the rest. Ranger wasn't the only one. Caleb's voice floated in from the living room. You can't leave yet. They turned. He stood in the archway, barefoot, one hand still damp from petting the dog. He needs you. He dreams about when you were together. He feels safe when you're nearby. Jake blinked. How would you? I just know, Caleb whispered. Emily knelt beside her son, brushing a curl off his forehead. How does Ranger feel now? He's tired, but not scared. He wants to stay. Jake stood, rubbing the back of his neck. Then stay for one more day, he told Logan. Storm hasn't cleared. Roads are a mess. We'll figure this out after breakfast. Reluctantly, Logan agreed. Later that morning, while Jake was out checking the down fence and Emily prepared pancakes in the kitchen, Caleb sat with Logan and asked softly, Did you miss him? Logan looked at the boy, his voice tight. Every damn day. Caleb nodded like he already knew. As the sky cleared slightly, bringing soft light over the soaked neighborhood, a dusty tan pickup truck rolled up to the Walker house. A woman stepped out, medium build, late 40s, wind-chapped cheeks, and sharp eyes that had once belonged to a trailblazer. Her name was Nora Green, a traveling vet tech, an old friend of Emily's from college. Nora had seen worse. She now worked with a mobile rescue unit that handled rural emergencies, often dealing with abuse cases when shelters were at capacity. She wore a thick field jacket, boots with steel toes, and a belt filled with tools and salves. Well, hell, she muttered when she saw Ranger. What kind of monster does this to a shepherd? Logan, quiet nearby, watched her carefully. Nora gently examined Ranger, who allowed her touch with surprising stillness. Internal bruising, cracked paw pad, starvation symptoms, but he's lucky. No fractures. Will he walk again? Caleb asked. Oh, sweetheart, she said kindly, he'll run again. You'll see. Before she left, she slipped Emily a bottle of antibiotics and gauze. Keep him warm. And keep him close. He'll heal faster than you think. That night, Logan stood on the porch, staring out across the soaked horizon as clouds parted to reveal the jagged ridges of the distant mountains. He'd nearly lost Boone. Again. But fate, or something stranger, had thrown this family in his path. And something told him this wasn't a coincidence. The evening sun fell behind the pines, casting long, eerie shadows across the cracked asphalt road that led into the Walker neighborhood. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles like small mirrors along the sidewalk. A deceptive calm hung over Bozeman, a lull that wrapped the town in silence, but not in peace. Inside the Walker home, the atmosphere had shifted. There was no more warm conversation over breakfast, no more laughter echoing faintly from the den. The air now felt tight, like lungs refusing to expand. Logan sat at the dining table, hunched over a map of Montana. His face, lined with fatigue, was drawn tight in a way that made the deep scar across his right temple stand out more than usual. His stubble had thickened, and his shirt clung slightly to his back from sweat, not warmth. He tapped his pen on the map, eyes flicking to the cluster of small towns east of Bozeman. Maddox doesn't forget. And he sure as hell doesn't forgive, Logan muttered. Jake leaned over his shoulder, his square jaw locked in a clenched frown. So what are you saying? You think they know you're here? Logan didn't answer immediately. He turned toward the window. I'm saying they're looking. They'll check hospitals, shelters, maybe even highway reports. And if they heard that someone saved the dog, they'll start sniffing. It won't take long. At that moment, Emily walked in, drying her hands on a dish towel. She wore a forest green sweatshirt and faded jeans. Her dark auburn hair had been pulled back in a low ponytail, but strands escaped near her temple, framing a face that had learned to balance kindness with vigilance. Her expression was cautious. There's been a white SUV circling the block for the past hour. Third time I've seen it. Jake straightened, alarm flaring in his eyes. You sure? I'm not imagining things. Logan moved quickly to the window, parting the curtain with 2 fingers. The street was empty now, but the tracks of tires still glistened on the wet curbside. It's starting, Logan said quietly. They're checking neighborhoods. Jake's voice hardened. Then let's call the police. You don't understand, Logan said. Maddox hires ex-cops. Pay some of them off. There's no guarantee who answers that call. Silence fell. Ranger, now able to sit upright, looked up from his place by the fireplace. His ears twitched. He didn't growl, just stared at the window with unreadable intensity. From the hallway, Caleb's small voice floated toward them. He's scared again. Emily turned. What, honey? Ranger. He smells someone he knows. Someone bad. Jake moved toward his son. Caleb, you sure about that? The boy nodded. It's like a shiver, but it's not mine. It goes all the way through my arms. He clutched his elbows tightly. Emily knelt down. Can you still feel what Ranger feels? Caleb looked down. Yes, even when he's asleep. It's like his feelings are inside me sometimes. It doesn't hurt. It's just loud. Emily's face shifted, part fear, part awe. You're not scared? No, Caleb whispered. He trusts me. Jake and Logan exchanged another look, unspoken but weighty. Ranger, still resting, let out a low whimper. Logan moved to him, placing a firm hand on his back. We've got to go, he said. Tonight, before they narrow it down. Jake folded his arms. We leave our home. Pack up and run like fugitives? Yes, Logan said sharply. Because they won't just come for me. They'll come for the boy too. If Maddox even thinks Caleb is connected to Ranger. Emily stood, her voice firm. Say no more. We're not risking him. They packed quickly. Essentials only. Emily gathered medicine, blankets, and Caleb's warmest clothes. Jake took his truck keys, a duffel bag with documents, and an old Glock from the safe beneath the stairs. Logan brought Ranger's improvised medical kit and loaded him gently into the back seat, layering the space with towels and soft cushions. Ranger didn't resist. His eyes never left Caleb. As they backed out of the driveway, headlights flicked on across the street. A man stood in the shadows, barely visible. Average height, plain gray windbreaker, phone in hand. Jake's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Logan hissed under his breath. Too late. He made us. The truck peeled onto the road, wheels splashing through puddles. Behind them, the SUV from earlier pulled out of a nearby alley. No sirens. Just steady, silent pursuit. They took the back roads, winding through the hills as the last traces of dusk bled into darkness. Ranger occasionally whimpered, and each time he did, Caleb would reach back and murmur something, soft words, indistinct, but they calmed the dog. They drove 2 hours before pulling into a quiet and used barn on a stretch of land once owned by a friend of Logan's, now abandoned but safe. The barn was large, with hay scattered in dry corners and walls thick enough to muffle sound. The wind outside howled like a restless ghost, but the interior was still and warm. Jake paced. "How long do you think we have?" Logan shook his head. "Not sure. But we bought time." Emily tucked Caleb into a pile of blankets near the hay loft. Ranger lay beside him, his head resting on the boy's knee. As the adults sat in silence, Emily looked up. "If they're hunting Ranger, are they hunting you too?" "Yes," Logan said. "And anyone near me." She swallowed. "Then we stay near each other. We protect each other." Jake nodded slowly. "No more running." And Ranger, listening from the ground, let out a deep, steady sigh. The air was thinner up here, crisp with pine and old secrets. 30 miles north of Bozeman, the land climbed toward the base of the Gallatin Range, where tree-lined ridges swallowed the sky and snow from the previous week still clung to shadowed hollows. Logan's cabin stood at the edge of a clearing, small and battered by time but solid. Made from rough-cut logs darkened by rain and years, it had a rusted tin roof, shuttered windows, and a stone chimney that now belched smoke into the cold mountain dusk. Logan had built it himself after leaving Eagle Crest Tactical, a place to be forgotten. He never expected to return with strangers, much less a wounded dog and a child with visions. Inside, the cabin was modest. A cast-iron stove, 2 cots, a long table covered in dust and scattered papers. One corner had an old radio and a fireproof lockbox. The smell of old wood, wax, and dry herbs clung to everything. Emily moved quietly through the space, brushing off surfaces and unpacking what little food they had brought. Her hands moved quickly, but her face betrayed exhaustion. Her sweater was threadbare, her boots muddy, but her eyes remained focused. It was the look of someone who had once lost everything and vowed never to do so again. Jake unloaded firewood and resecured the truck under camouflage netting behind the hill, while Logan tended to Ranger. The German Shepherd was curled up on a wool blanket beside the fire, breathing shallowly. His bandages were damp, and the redness around his stitches had deepened. His dark fur, once thick and proud, was now dull, matted in places, and clung to his ribs like cloth. Logan crouched beside him, his broad shoulders tense. He cleaned the wound with antiseptic and applied fresh salve, movements precise but gentler than one would expect from a man who once served in combat. "You're not giving up," he murmured. "You didn't survive all that for this." Ranger stirred at the sound of his voice but didn't lift his head. Caleb sat a few feet away, cross-legged, hands in his lap. He was pale under the flickering firelight, eyes too old for his age. "He's not giving up," Caleb said softly. "But he's remembering." Logan glanced at the boy. "What do you mean?" Caleb tilted his head. "He's dreaming again. I can see it. There's a red wall and wires. The floor smells like metal and blood. He was smaller then. They shouted at him." Jake had just stepped inside when he froze at the words. "That's not normal," he muttered. Emily looked to Logan. "He's describing something real, isn't he?" Logan's expression tightened. "The training compound. One of them. They painted the walls red so blood wouldn't show. The dogs were kept in cages near the generator room. They trained them with electric floors, strobe lights, deprivation." Caleb shivered, but didn't look away. He didn't want to bite her. "No," Logan confirmed. He never did. Later that night, with the others asleep, Logan sat at the table with a worn leather pouch open before him. Inside was a thick USB drive, its casing scratched and labeled only with a single letter. E. He stared at it like it might explode. He had taken it the night he fled the facility, after Boone, Ranger, refused to obey. The drive contained everything: training footage, financial records, internal memos signed by Maddox himself, contracts with companies that never should have existed. Enough to bring the man down, but only if it reached the right hands. Logan heard soft footsteps. Emily stood in the doorway in thick socks and an oversized flannel, her arms crossed. "You should show Jake." "I will, when we're closer to a signal." No sense risking upload from here. You've had that since the beginning? Yes. And you waited why? Logan's voice dropped. Because I needed to survive first. Meanwhile, Caleb stirred in his sleep. He twitched, small hands curled in the blanket. Ranger, sensing something, pressed his snout against the boy's side. The moment his nose touched him, Caleb gasped and sat bolt upright. They're coming again, he whispered. In trucks. With cages. Boone saw them. Emily rushed over. It was just a dream, sweetheart. But Logan was already on his feet. Not just a dream. He moved to the back of the cabin and opened a hidden hatch beneath the cot. Inside was a small radio transmitter and a metal case containing a loaded flare gun, a folded map, and a set of dog tags. He handed the flare gun to Jake. This is our alarm. If anything happens, we light the sky. Jake stared. You think it's real? I think we can't afford not to. Caleb lay back down, but his eyes remained open. He's not scared anymore, he said. He just wants to protect us. Outside, the wind picked up again, whispering through the trees like voices too old to understand. Somewhere in the dark, something watched. But for now, the fire burned on, and the cabin held. The wind howled louder that night, thrashing through the trees like a warning whispered by the forest itself. Cold crept into the walls of the cabin, and the fire had dwindled to a low glow when Logan sat upright on his cot, every muscle in his body tensed. A sound, not natural, not wildlife. The crunch of boots on frozen pine needles. He stood slowly, moved to the window, and peered through the cracked wooden slats. A glimmer, no more than a flicker of metal catching moonlight, moved at the tree line. He turned to Jake, who had dozed off in a chair. Wake everyone, Logan whispered. We've been found. Within seconds, Emily and Caleb were up, Ranger already alert beside them. Though still weak, his ears were pricked and his body low to the ground, muscles twitching as if sensing something long before any of them could. Logan crossed the cabin and knelt beside a trapdoor in the corner near the hearth. This leads to a crawl tunnel I built years ago. It's narrow, but it opens near a stream about a mile downhill. Jake grabbed his backpack and reached for Caleb, who was trembling. You okay, buddy? Caleb nodded. He says to hurry. Ranger barked once, low and sharp, then moved toward the trapdoor. Logan pushed it open, revealing a wooden ladder descending into blackness. One by one, they climbed down into the dark. The passage was tight, carved from rock and clay, just wide enough for a person to crawl. Emily followed Caleb, her hands scraping cold earth, the smell of mold and iron pressing into her senses. Behind her, Ranger moved slowly but with purpose, his nose close to the ground. Logan brought up the rear, checking over his shoulder as muffled thuds sounded from above, boots storming the cabin. They're in, he whispered. Move faster. The air grew colder the deeper they crawled. Caleb began to whimper, not from fear but from something else. He's remembering again, he said shakily. He was trapped like this before, buried alive. Emily felt a chill unrelated to the tunnel. Her hands paused on the dirt wall as a memory surged. Her older brother, James, running across a battlefield in Iraq, the silhouette of a military dog beside him. The dog had been trained to detect bombs, but that day something went wrong. James never came home. The report said the dog had triggered an explosive. She had blamed dogs ever since. Until now. They emerged from the tunnel near dawn, under a shelf of rock overlooking a wide stream hidden deep within the woods. Fog lay low across the ground, curling around their boots like fingers of the earth itself. The moment they stepped out, Ranger pushed forward, sniffing the air, ears sharp. Logan surveyed their surroundings. They won't know this exit unless they tear the whole place apart. Emily sat down beside a fallen log, cradling Caleb in her arms. Her face was pale. She hadn't spoken since they entered the tunnel. You all right? Jake asked, kneeling beside her. She shook her head slowly. I can't go back in the dark. Not like that again. Jake rubbed her back gently. You don't have to. Caleb looked up at his mother, eyes wide with something more than fear. He didn't mean to hurt Uncle James. Everyone went still. Emily's breath caught. What did you say? Ranger remembers. The bomb. The fear. The shouting. It wasn't his fault. He tried to stop it. Tears welled in her eyes. The years she had buried the anger, the grief, the unspoken blame, they began to crack open like ice under pressure. Ranger stepped closer. He nudged her hand gently with his nose. She didn't recoil. Instead, she placed a hand on his head. "I know," she whispered. The group followed the stream south, using the fog and trees as cover. Hours passed before Logan led them to a rock overhang, camouflaged by brush, where they could rest. There, for the first time, he saw them not as just a family caught in his war, but as soldiers in their own right. "Who were they?" Jake finally asked. "The ones at the cabin?" "Contractors," Logan replied. "Ex-military, like I used to be. Paid to silence anything that threatens Maddox's operations. They don't hesitate." Caleb leaned against Emily, who was no longer tense around Ranger. "Will they keep coming?" "Yes," Logan said. "But we'll be ready." He looked at the flare gun in Jake's bag, then back at the boy and the dog. "Because they have something we don't. Orders. But we have something stronger." "What's that?" Jake asked. Logan looked down at Ranger, then at Caleb. "We have purpose." The forest had grown louder by the hour, no longer with birdsong or wind, but with the anxious crackling of twigs, the distant thrum of helicopters, and the static tension of breath held too long. Logan led the group through a narrow ravine that descended sharply into a basin surrounded by limestone cliffs. At its center roared Whitlow Falls, a two-tiered cascade that spilled into a rushing pool before disappearing into an underground stream. It was a sacred, secret place known only to hunters and wanderers. Logan had hoped it would be a temporary refuge. It became a trap instead. He was limping now, his left leg torn from a branch that snapped in the underbrush earlier that morning, leaving a deep gash along his thigh. He had torn part of his flannel shirt to stanch the bleeding, but his movements were slower. Sweat clung to his brow despite the mountain chill. Still, he pressed forward, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes scanning the cliffs. Ranger was ahead, moving slowly, yet deliberate. The German shepherd, though clearly worn, ears drooping and ribs prominent beneath his thick fur, pushed through the terrain like it was instinct. He would pause, sniff the air, then continue with renewed urgency. Caleb followed close behind, one small hand resting on Ranger's back, almost like he was guiding the dog, or being guided himself. Jake stayed behind Emily, who had taken charge of carrying a makeshift pack filled with supplies. Her posture had changed. No longer was she simply a protective mother. Her movements now carried the determination of someone who had chosen to confront a lifetime of fear and finally act. They reached the basin's edge. The roar of the waterfall filled the canyon like a god's voice. Logan raised a hand for silence. "We rest here for 10 minutes, he said. "Then we cut across the base of the cliffs and follow the stream east to the trailhead. There's a ranger station 20 miles from there." But before anyone could sit, the air split with the unmistakable crack of a sniper round. The bullet struck a tree inches from Logan's head, shattering bark. Another landed in the dirt at Emily's feet. Ranger growled low and pressed Caleb against a rock. "Ambush!" Jake yelled, pulling his handgun from his coat. From above the cliffs, figures emerged, black-clad, faces obscured by balaclavas and visors. At least 6. Each armed, each moving with calculated aggression. And leading them, unmistakable even from above, stood Maddox himself. Clean-shaven, tall, in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a cruel elegance. He wore a dark tactical coat and stood with his hands behind his back as though he were watching a play. "Logan," Maddox's voice echoed, smooth and mocking. "Still playing the hero with broken toys?" Logan raised his rifle, though his arm shook. "You have no jurisdiction here." Maddox smirked. "That's where you're wrong. This whole forest is mine. You just didn't get the memo." Then, from the shadows, one of the masked men lunged and grabbed Caleb. The boy screamed as he was yanked backward. "No!" Emily shouted, rushing forward, but another soldier blocked her. "Stay down!" Logan barked, but his voice was hoarse. Ranger let out a deafening snarl and bounded toward the soldier holding Caleb. The German shepherd moved like lightning, driven not by instinct but by something deeper, something ancient. His paws barely touched the earth. His teeth flashed. "Take the shot," one soldier yelled. Too late. Ranger crashed into the man, knocking him off balance. Caleb fell free, rolling down a slope toward the water. The soldier screamed as Ranger's teeth clamped onto his arm. Blood spurted across the rocks. Another gunman raised his rifle, but Jake shot first, hitting him square in the shoulder. Chaos erupted. Bullets whizzed through the canyon, ricocheting off stone. Logan, dragging one leg, got to Caleb and shielded him with his body. A bullet grazed his ribs, knocking him flat. Blood soaked into his shirt. He clenched his teeth and shouted, "Fall back. Get Caleb out." Ranger stood over the fallen soldier, teeth bared. Caleb, now safe in Emily's arms, cried out, "No, don't kill him." The German shepherd froze. His chest heaved, foam flecking his jaws. He had every reason, every justification to end this man. But he didn't. Caleb stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Ranger's back. "You're not like them. You don't have to be like them." Maddox, watching from above, seemed almost intrigued. The surviving soldiers, seeing their leader untouched and their men falling, began to retreat. Maddox gave a last glance toward Logan, then Ranger, and finally Caleb. He said nothing. He simply turned and vanished back into the cliffs. Ranger collapsed seconds later. His body slumped beside the stream, breath shallow, eyes glazed with pain. Logan, now barely conscious, tried to crawl toward him, but collapsed beside the dog. Jake helped pull Logan back behind a boulder, while Emily pressed gauze against his wounds. "You're lucky," she muttered. "That didn't hit your lung." Logan coughed. "We've only delayed them." "But Caleb's safe," Emily whispered. Caleb knelt beside Ranger. "He didn't forget who he is." Ranger's tail twitched just once. The hum of the rescue van echoed hollow in the silence. Pine trees blurred past the window as the road twisted through the hills outside Ashbrook. Rain lashed against the windshield, a last remnant of the storm that had haunted them for days. In the back of the van, beneath a woolen blanket and Caleb's trembling arms, Ranger was dying. His breaths came shallow and staggered. Blood had seeped through the bandages Logan had hastily applied after the ambush by the waterfall, where Caleb had been taken hostage and Ranger had fought through bullets and pain to save him. He had collapsed the moment they reached the safety of the van, too exhausted to even whine. His body, once a marvel of strength and agility, now lay limp, muscles trembling in quiet defeat. Caleb, barely 10, held Ranger's head in his lap. Tears traced clean lines down his mud-streaked face. His flannel shirt was soaked with rain, sweat, and a dog's lifeblood. He whispered words no one else could hear, words he didn't understand but felt through the strange connection that had always existed between them, as if thoughts traveled from heart to heart instead of mouth to ear. "Please don't go," he breathed, forehead resting against the dog's. "I'm not ready yet." Ranger blinked slowly, the fire in his amber eyes dimming but still there. His tongue reached weakly to lick the boy's fingers. One last act of loyalty. One last goodbye. Emily sat in the front passenger seat, eyes fixed on the road but cheeks wet. She didn't turn around, didn't speak. She had lost a brother years ago in a war, and though this wasn't the same, the feeling in her chest now was terrifyingly familiar. Jake drove with both hands gripping the wheel, like it was the only thing anchoring him. He didn't look back either, but every red light he passed felt like betrayal. Logan sat across from Caleb, his wounded leg stretched awkwardly. He had tied his bandage tighter earlier, but now his attention was fixed only on the dying dog. There was no adrenaline left to distract him, no mission left to complete. Just this, watching the companion he had raised from a pup, the dog he had trained to be a tool of war, then tried to redeem, slip from this world in the arms of a child. Ranger's eyes fluttered. Caleb felt it, the moment the soul let go. There was no sound, no shudder. Just stillness. He pressed his forehead harder against the still warm fur, as if he could hold time back by sheer will. "He's gone," Logan said, voice like gravel dragged across grief. The van pulled over near the town's fire station. Jake turned off the engine, and silence settled in like a blanket no one wanted. Caleb didn't move for a long time. Finally, he reached down and removed Ranger's worn collar, still stained from the tracks where they first found him. He clutched it to his chest. "I heard him," Caleb whispered. "Before it happened. He said thank you." No one doubted it. By morning, word had spread. The Ashbrook Sheriff's Office confirmed that a task force had arrested several men from the Maddox organization in a cabin near the county border. Logan had turned over the flash drive with all the damning evidence: video files, transaction logs, genetic breeding charts, and training footage that would haunt jurors for years. His sworn statement connected the dots. Sheriff Helen Morse, a tall, broad-shouldered woman with short salt and pepper hair and the sharp demeanor of someone who had seen enough of people's worst, stood behind the podium at the town center and addressed the press with grim satisfaction. "This dog," she said, holding up a photograph of Ranger, "did what no one else dared. And this boy," she gestured to Caleb beside her, who clutched the collar in his small hand, "risked his life because he believed no one was disposable. Let that be a lesson." A murmur passed through the crowd. Some clapped. Some cried. Caleb didn't register much of it. His focus was somewhere else entirely. That night, under a pale crescent moon, they brought Ranger home. The Walker family had only just moved into the countryside property. Wooden house, creaking steps, wild grass in the backyard. The oak tree out back stood like a silent witness to all things. Beneath it, Jake dug the grave. Emily stood beside Caleb with a candle in her hands, and Logan rested nearby on a stool, cane in hand, watching silently. They wrapped Ranger in a blue flannel blanket, the same one Caleb had kept on his bed since they found the dog. Jake lowered him in with slow reverence. No words were spoken during the burial. None were needed. That night, Caleb sat by the window long after everyone else had gone to bed. The collar lay on his desk. The wind stirred the branches of the oak tree, and for a moment, he swore he heard paws on the porch, soft, familiar, and gone just as quickly. The skies over Ashbrook had returned to stillness. Morning light filtered through the clouds in soft streaks of gold and gray, and the first chill of autumn whispered through the oaks. The Walker family stood in silence beneath the largest tree on their new property, a great southern oak with branches that reached like arms into the horizon, its roots buried deep into the soil as if holding secrets of generations past. It was under this tree that Ranger now rested. They had moved weeks ago, settling just outside town on a quiet ridge where no noise from traffic reached, where the forest loomed like a protective barrier and the creek still babbled unseen beyond the hill. Ranger had died days after the ambush, not from a bullet, but from the accumulation of wounds, of sacrifice. He had spent his final hours with Caleb curled beside him on the porch, both silent, connected by something unspoken, as if the boy's breath gave rhythm to the dog's fading heartbeat. The small wooden marker Jake had carved bore only one word: Ranger. Beneath it, Caleb placed a worn leather collar, its metal tag still scratched from the night Ranger had chewed through chain and pain to save him. Emily set a single sunflower beside it, and Logan, leaning heavier than before on his cane, saluted with a hand that trembled not from age, but from the weight of memory. Logan had aged in these weeks. His beard now held more silver than brown. He wore a faded army jacket, frayed at the cuffs, and walked with the slow deliberateness of a man who had made peace with ghosts. He had come not only to pay respects, but to keep a promise. After the burial, while Jake and Emily lingered in the yard speaking quietly, Logan turned to Caleb and motioned for him to follow. "There's someone I want you to meet," he said. They drove in Logan's pickup along a winding dirt road just outside Ashbrook, where the hills flattened into pasture and the scent of pine gave way to hay. The truck pulled up beside a weathered barn that stood crooked against the wind, flanked by a wire-fenced field where dogs of every size and breed ran and rolled in the grass. It was the Haven Creek Rescue Center, an old rehabilitation camp-turned-refuge, run by volunteers and guarded by the same silence Logan always carried. They were greeted by Meredith, a soft-spoken woman in her 60s with short gray curls and eyes that had seen both cruelty and redemption. She wore a denim shirt tucked into faded jeans, and her hands were calloused from years of feeding, healing, and holding broken animals back from the edge. "Logan said you were coming," she said warmly, kneeling to meet Caleb's eyes. "You're the boy Ranger chose." Caleb said nothing, but the way he looked around, the curiosity and calm in his gaze, spoke louder than any greeting. Meredith led them past the kennels to a quieter part of the barn, where a small pen had been built in the hay. Inside, a German Shepherd mix had given birth days earlier. She lay curled around 5 tiny puppies, their fur like burnt cream, ears still floppy, eyes barely open. "This is Willow," Meredith whispered. "Ranger's sister." Logan added gently, "When I left Maddox's program, I brought her out too. I couldn't save them all, but I saved her." Willow raised her head. Though visibly tired, there was a gentleness in her gaze as she looked at Caleb, as if some part of her recognized something in the boy. Caleb knelt by the pen, hands on the wooden edge. One of the pups, smaller than the others, stumbled over its siblings and nudged toward Caleb's side. Its fur was slightly darker, and a small white patch marked its forehead like a crescent moon. Meredith smiled. "That one was the last born. A fighter. We call him Scout." The pup pressed its tiny paw against the edge where Caleb's hand rested, then let out a high-pitched whine. "He remembers," Caleb said softly, more to himself than anyone else. Logan lowered himself slowly beside the boy. "He doesn't have Ranger's body, but maybe he has his heart." They sat there for hours, long after the other dogs quieted, long after the sun passed overhead. Caleb never left the edge of the pen. Scout never left his side. The connection was not loud, not dramatic. It was simply there, effortless and rooted. Emily and Jake arrived later to pick them up. When they saw the boy curled in the straw with the puppy nestled against his chest, they understood without words. Meredith turned to Logan. "You think the world's finally given that boy peace?" Logan stared at the boy and the dog, and in a voice nearly lost to the wind said, "No. I think the boy gave the world another chance." The morning sun cast its golden warmth across the newly painted porch of the Walker family's countryside home. Dew still clung to the grass like a final farewell from the night, and in the distance, the sound of the creek murmured beneath the trees. For the first time in months, peace didn't feel like a borrowed luxury, it felt earned. Caleb sat on the porch steps, legs crisscrossed, a faint smile tugging at his cheeks as he watched Scout tumble clumsily through the yard. The pup, barely 8 weeks old, had the energy of a dozen squirrels and the focus of none. His fur gleamed in the morning light, mostly dark with reddish undertones, and that distinct crescent of white on his brow had already become Caleb's favorite spot to kiss. His tail wagged like a metronome set to joy, and every few steps, he'd glance back to ensure Caleb was still watching. Inside the house, Emily stood in the kitchen, folding fresh laundry with mechanical efficiency, but an unshakable lightness in her demeanor. Her once weary eyes now glimmered with quiet hope. Nearby, Jake leaned against the doorway, sipping coffee, his beard trimmed, posture looser than it had been in months. The storm of their past, the chase, the fear, the bullets and blood, had finally passed, leaving behind not scars but foundations. Logan arrived that afternoon. He walked up the path slowly, favoring his healing leg, but standing taller than he had in weeks. He wore a new jacket, military green canvas with no insignia, and in his hand he carried a worn manila folder. Caleb ran up to him before anyone else, and Scout bounded behind the boy with a bark that ended in a yip of excitement. "You two already inseparable?" Logan chuckled, kneeling down. He scratched behind Scout's ear, then looked at Caleb seriously. "He sleep at the foot of your bed yet?" Caleb nodded. "Every night." Jake stepped out to meet them, wiping his hands on a rag. "Didn't expect to see you so soon." Logan stood and handed him the folder. "Thought you'd want these. Papers finalizing Scout's adoption. Vet records. Ta registration." Jake took it and nodded his thanks. But Logan lingered. After a pause, he turned to Emily. "Mind if I talk to Caleb for a moment? Just us?" Emily looked uncertain but nodded. "Go ahead." They walked a few steps down the slope toward the oak tree. The marker was still there. Ranger. The ground around it had settled, covered with fresh wildflowers Caleb replanted last week. Scout padded beside them, nosing curiously at petals. Logan took a breath. There's something I didn't mention at the shelter. Caleb looked up, curious. I said Scout might have Ranger's heart. That was only partly metaphor. Logan reached into his coat and pulled out an old notebook, weathered from years of use. He flipped to a page, showing a scanned copy of a genetic tracking sheet. Back when Ranger was being trained, Maddox was running a breeding program. Only a handful of litters survived. Ranger had one mate before the shutdown. Willow. Caleb blinked. So, Scout, Logan nodded slowly. There's a high chance he's Ranger's pup. Caleb looked at Scout. The pup sat now, tail thumping lazily, tongue lolling to the side, utterly unbothered. Does he know? I think he does, Logan said softly. He chose you like his father did. No hesitation. Caleb knelt, wrapping his arms gently around the puppy. Scout responded with a delighted yelp and wriggled into the boy's chest. Logan stood back, watching. This is why I came back, he said under his breath, not to Caleb but to himself. Later that evening, as twilight dusted the treetops and fireflies lit up the backyard, the Walker family gathered on the porch. Caleb held Scout in his lap, the pup finally asleep after a long day of digging and zooming and chasing after nothing. Emily brought out hot cocoa. Jake turned on the string lights they had hung around the eaves. It felt like a celebration, though no one said so. Logan remained quiet for a time, watching the family he had nearly died helping, watching the boy and the dog that had changed everything. Then he spoke. I've been thinking, he said, breaking the soft hum of night. There are others out there, like Ranger. Dogs trained, used, broken, then discarded. Some never got a second chance. Emily looked at him, understanding dawning. You want to save them? Logan nodded. Not just save. Reclaim. Train them differently. Show them kindness isn't a weakness. Jake sipped his drink. You got a plan? Starting small, Logan said. Old military kennel out near Ridgepoint's available for lease. Gonna call it the Second Pact. Dogs that served, abandoned, betrayed, they'll come there to heal. Maybe some humans too. Caleb looked up. Can Scout help? Logan smiled. He already is. The wind carried the sound of laughter across the porch. In that moment, it felt like every scar, every shadow had led to this new dawn. Ranger was gone, yes, but his legacy had not been buried under the oak. It was alive in the little dog snoring in Caleb's lap. It was alive in the boy who smiled again. It was alive in every choice made from now on, for love, not obedience. In a world often clouded by cruelty, betrayal, and silence, the story of Ranger and Caleb reminds us that even the most broken souls can still be instruments of grace. Ranger was trained for war, discarded when he chose compassion, and yet, through the love of a child, he fulfilled a purpose far greater than anything men could force upon him. This was not just a rescue story. It was a reminder that miracles still happen, not always in thunder or lightning, but in quiet acts of loyalty, sacrifice, and love. Some say it was coincidence that Caleb heard Ranger's cry, but perhaps it was the voice of God, whispering through a storm, calling one heart to another. In our daily lives, we may feel small, unheard, or powerless. But like Caleb, when we choose to listen, to a cry, a silence, a soul in need, we open the door for heaven to move through us. When we act with courage and compassion, we do not just help others, we invite God's light into the darkest places. So if this story touched your heart, let it be more than a moment. Type amen in the comments if you believe no life is too lost for love. Share this story with someone who still believes in second chances. Subscribe for more true stories of hope, sacrifice, and divine timing. May the Lord bless you for every time you listened when others turned away. And may the Spirit of Ranger remind us that redemption is always possible, with faith, with love, and with the quiet courage to do what's right.